welcome. We're very fortunate to have today at the LSE Jess Price-Jones, whose book Intuition at Work has just come out, and Christian Bush, who joins us from Los Angeles and is the author of The Serendipity Mindset. Both of these books take what you might call an oblique approach to management, leadership, and strategy making. They complement the kind of analytical and more instrumental tools that we typically recognize as the levers of strategy making and organizational development and commercial success. And in that sense, they complement each other absolutely perfectly. I did what all good introducers of other people do yesterday. So I compared the indexes of their books. I looked for references to serendipity in Jess's book, and I looked for references to intuition in Christian's book. Have I got that the right way around? Yes. And I'm delighted to say that they were mutually reinforcing. So there was lots of material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of them to describe for you very briefly the broad arc of their books, just in 3 or 4 minutes. And then I'm going to ask them some questions on your behalf, and then I'm going to ask you to ask them some questions on your own behalf. And I'm going to start, if I may, Jess, please, with you, just to give us the kernel of your intuition work.
Okay, first of all, let me just say thank you so much for being here, and it's a great pleasure and a privilege. So my book is really simple. It's divided into the why, the what, and the how. And so I just really answer the questions, why is intuition so important? And I think that some of the data just really speaks for itself. It's something that nobody says matters, but it's really clear that it does if you want to get to senior level. So just give you very quickly some research findings. When people are new managers, so frontline managers, 50% of them say that intuition matters as part of their decision making. When they become leaders, 62% of them say that it starts to have an impact on their decision making. 75% of C-suite say it matters, but 99% of CEOs tell us that this is something that informs how they manage their organizations. But I don't think that that's something that people generally know. And so if you're young and you want to get to the top, what is this thing? How do you experience it? What's it going to do for you? Because for me, intuition is super important in volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous situations where you might be overwhelmed with data, but you might have none at all, and yet you still have to make a decision. And what you're paid for is the quality of that decision that you make. So for me, it's not about, is it intuition or is it analysis? It's a both and situation. And what we want to do is apply intuition to our analysis and analyze our intuition so that we get these better strategic decisions, we get better hires, we get assessment and judgment of risks at a superior level, because it's this combination that we're really looking for. And data is never going to give you all the answers by itself, and nor is intuition. I would be very skeptical of someone just saying, I've got this wonderful feeling, I'm going to do something big and hairy and dangerous. I want to know a bit more. But it's this cognitive kind of ambidexterity that we're looking for. And so that really is what my book is all about, which it's full of little illustrations from leaders that I've worked with, talked to, about how they have experienced it. And I've also put in some little cautionary tales, because I'm sure that we have all been in this situation. And oh my God, I was in it again last year in a massive, horrible way, which is I didn't listen to my intuition. I had this really, really strong sense I shouldn't do this thing. And I did it. And it was just absolutely, the unraveling was horrible. I mean, it was horrible. It was keep you up at night horrible. So it's worth avoiding those situations too. So I think that's me, Stefan.
Thank you, Jess. I mean, we'll come back to this, but I suspect we have all ignored a very strong kind of visceral signal not to do something. And we've done it out of a sense of duty or of momentum or whatever it is that we've done, and then regretted it. And I guess the question always is the regret partly a function of did it go badly? Did it go wrong because we thought it would go wrong, or was it going to go wrong before it went wrong?
No, this was me being absolutely instrumental in making something go wrong.
Yeah.
And I had this very strong sense not to do it because there could be a negative outcome. Oh my God. I mean, honestly, 10 minutes later there was.
Yeah.
So I was
and
so
there are lots
quick.
of examples in your book of positive intuition. Christian, could you likewise tell us a little bit about your serendipity work?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here and to talk about those kind of themes that I think have a lot in common. So, what I found fascinating over the last decade is that, as entrepreneur, as researcher, that the most interesting, inspiring people, they seem to have something in common, which is that they somehow intuitively cultivate serendipity. They're really good at somehow seeing something in unexpected moments, connecting the dots, and then doing something with it. And so the question was, is there something behind that? Is there some sort of pattern behind this? Because it seems to be very different from how we think about luck usually, right? Luck is usually something we see as out of our control, something that happens to us, good or bad, right? Good luck, bad luck. And it creates a lot of societal inequality because some people just get placed differently than others. And then serendipity really as this active luck, the smart luck that we create by how we navigate the unexpected. What do we do with the unexpected? Let me give you an example. I mean, imagine you're in a coffee shop and you have erratic hand movements like I do, and you accidentally spill a coffee over the person next to you, and that person looks at you slightly annoyedly, but you have the sense there might be something there, right? You have the intuition, hey, maybe there's something in this moment. And now you have a couple of options, right? One option is you just say, I'm so sorry, here's a napkin. You go outside and you think, what could have happened had I spoken with that person? Option two, you start that conversation, that person becomes the love of your life or your next co-founder or you name it. And the thing here is that I think, and we'll probably talk more about it, this idea of that there's so much potentiality in that moment. There's so much that could happen in that moment, but you walk through one door and that door then is essentially where you end up next. And I think there's so much in there, and we'll probably get to that also, how you can cultivate that, how you can create a mindset for making it more likely that you have the unexpected, the positively unexpected happen, but also more likely that you can, cope better with the negatively unexpected and really build a muscle for that. And that's kind of what I find is interesting. And I think that's kind of also one of the core links to intuition, to say, hey, in those moments, do you learn to trust your gut that in those moments, actually, you want to act on that, you want to connect the dots and do something with it rather than kind of shying away from it and walking outside.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Just quickly on your coffee shop thing, one of the things I took from your book, and tell me if I've remembered this correctly, is you list a group of things that are, as it were, obstacles to kind of serendipity, and one of them is post-rationalization, if I remember correctly. So tell me, before we get on to more general questions, tell me why the amazing person who changes your life, whom you spilt coffee on, why is that not subject to the same kind of post-rationalization thing? Because there are lots of amazing people and you meet others and, and so on and so on. Unmute, Christian, unmute.
Very good point. Thank you. Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because a lot of times that's what we do in life. We somehow then, after something happened, we connect the dots at hindsight, right? And we try to figure out like, okay, what was it here? And then you create a narrative around that. What I do think is really interesting is to, Steve Jobs had this whole thing of you can only connect the dots at hindsight because, you look at UCV, you think about, oh my God, all these like random things I did, but then you see a red thread where you're like, oh, actually, it was always my passion for people or whatever it is. And then the question becomes, though, can you develop some foresight for that? Can you somehow, by, for example, connecting the dots and saying, I know I'm excited about connecting people, can my next job be more about people? Or if I am in unexpected situations, can I, do that based on those kind of values that I've identified for myself? And so it gives us this guiding frame where post-rationalization can be a bias. It can harm us if it kind of gives us this rigidity and this kind of fixedness of saying, no, it's only happening within that small constrained space. But it can also help us to, for our own sense making, potentially, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, kind of connect the system 1, system 2 type thing where you say, here's the intuitive that's happening, here's the analytical. And instead of creating false narratives that are all about, this was all rational, this was all planned, you're creating the kind of narrative of, this was unplanned, but I have a mechanism to actually make the best out of the unplanned. And I think that's kind of a more honest way to go about life also, to say, I can't control everything. I can't pretend that I could have seen this coming, but also I can then learn how to, connect my analytical system to those kind of incidences.
Okay, very
And
helpful.
I just want to jump in here. I don't like post-rationalization. I think actually it's something that we should jump away from, because the post-rationalization is never as powerful and strong as the intuition that you have in the moment. And it's almost impossible to explain that to someone else. And when you do start doing it, it diminishes the power of your own lived experience. And I think that is so important when it comes to intuition. So yes, and is my challenge to the post-rationalization thing.
I love yes and. I think it might end up being one of the kind of one of my easy summaries. I want to turn now, and you've both hinted slightly at this, but I just want to kind of mop up and I hope clear away some of the kind of obvious things that people say. Okay, so when I say to people, look, I'm really interested in intuition and I'm really interested in serendipity as organizing principles for ventures, okay, or for strategy making or for leadership. People say, yeah, but isn't this just, as it were, a way of re-establishing, re-legitimizing bias? Or isn't this just a way of redescribing pattern recognition by experts? Okay, so I wonder if, and you have both thought, a lot and deeply about these kinds of questions, and I wonder if you can, as it were, take head on the kinds of things that people say to me when I say I'm interested in serendipity and intuition. And since you're unmuted, Christian, I'm guessing you want to go first.
No, delighted to go first. And I think, Stefan, we talked about this earlier, that, when I started my PhD, when was that, 2008, 9? Like I was told, hey, don't work on those kind of themes because it's academic suicide to do those kind of things. Like, don't go there. And what I found fascinating is, we just talked about, now there's a special issue on serendipity and chance in the major strategy journal, right? It's the kind of thing where the major academics in the world are saying, hey, maybe we missed something here, that we can look at strategy, we can look at management, but we also have to be honest that there's only so much we can plan. And it's not only planning versus the unexpected, but actually maybe you can prepare better for the unexpected by building a muscle for it. And I think the interesting thing here is, and what I found fascinating is, I think this is just a real shift in thinking, right? The kind of old school leadership is, I pretend I know everything and here's my plan, right? And then new school leadership is, I planned everything and then some lucky things happened or unlucky things, and that's there. And then to your point, maybe it's not an either or, but maybe it's the kind of paradoxical tension that you can actually then build a narrative around and say, you know what, here's a vocabulary for cultivating serendipity, where it's not either here's a plan and then the unexpected destroyed it. Here's a plan, then I cultivate an environment for unexpected occasions that can actually be turned into something, and here's an even better plan now. And when you look at companies, that have done that really well, MasterCard, for example, Ajay Banga, when he was the CEO, he would go in and he would say, you know what, here's our North Star. We want to bring 400 million people who were previously unbanked into the financial system. That's where we want to go. Here's our strategy, step by step by step. But if Hilda in Cape Town tells us that the strategy doesn't work with her, we will adjust the plan. And that is part of our strategy. And I think this kind of like pricing the unexpected into the planning, it's a sign of, people would sometimes say, oh, it's a sign of humility. No, it's a sign of being realistic, that real life actually is not a straight line, but it's a squiggle. But if we can plan for the squiggle, we make it more likely that we are successful. And so, Stefan, I think actually the reason I'm so excited about these topics, especially now, is that more and more people kind of realize, I think, that it's not an antithesis to planning. I'm a German, I love planning. It's not about saying planning, we shouldn't plan. No, by any means, let's plan as much as we can, but let's build in that muscle for the unexpected as a key planning mechanism. And I think that's kind of, in a way, that beautiful paradox then that we can create.
And I love it because not everything is linear or instrumental. Jess?
I think I just want to pick up on what Christian was saying. And I think the zeitgeist right now is much more accepting of this kind of way of working, thinking, planning, doing. Organizations internally and the institutions that do that support leadership learning, I think, are having a struggle more to catch up with it, or some of them are, because it's absolutely clear that when you move between and in the room that you do this, that you say, right, we're going to start off with, and what are your hunches about this? And if you don't like the word intuition, I'm totally fine with that. Call it what you want. We're going to start off with your hunches about this, and then we're going to look at the analysis and have a discussion, and then we're going to come back. And you do this deliberately. It's really clear that you get better outcomes, and you get then what's team intuition. And team intuition is a relatively new concept, which is, this isn't about brainstorming. This is about the quality of the discussion that you're having that moves everybody into a different way of thinking and therefore deciding. So it's to do with the quality of what happens in the room. And when you're part of that, it's very exciting. And I love facilitating around that because you just see something different happening, and the energy that goes with it is just fantastic. So I'm not sure that I've answered your question, but I have noticed another one that's come up in the Q&A, which is about, which I think is important for us also to address, which is this, are people saying that intuition, it's about increased experience rather than intuition? So this increased experience thing, I think we need to be careful of that, because lots of people think that intuition equals experience. And of course, I'm with expert intuition. But I do also think that there's a catch in that, because are you saying that young people have no intuition? That's obvious rubbish. And I interviewed one CEO who told me that she knew she needed to leave her job when her intuitions were absolutely off. She couldn't have them anymore. So, and she was hugely experienced. This was towards the end of her career when she was in her 50s. And she went, oh, I need another job because my intuition isn't working for me anymore. So I think that we can have these expert intuitions, of course, but there's also the non-expert intuition, which is, you walk into, and you ask lots of consultants about this, and they'll tell you, you go into an organization which is unknown to you, and you just go, okay, I think this is where the problem lies, without doing tons and tons and tons of due diligence. You're just putting stuff together, and you say, maybe that's my consulting experience, but you have none of it in this organization. So there we go.
Jess, how do you practice distinguishing between, in my language, rather crudely, good intuitions and false intuitions? Because, I mean, in my life, I've had experience of calling things wrong.
Oh, I mean, we all have, but I think
if we attune ourselves more effectively to intuition, how do we then attune ourselves to the signal rather than the noise, where the noise is the intuition that, this person is not trustworthy, even though it turns out in the fullness of experience that they are?
I had exactly that experience yesterday. I was talking to somebody and I thought, what you're saying is total BS. And then I thought, okay, you've made a judgment here. Be honest. Is that ego talking, right? This person was challenging my thinking. So I just thought, okay, just sit with it, keep listening. Because I think we need to be really clear about taking ego and wishful thinking out of the picture.
And so bias, presumably, just to go back to the classic objection.
Yeah, bias. But I think it's bias if you're cherry picking your data, you're making decisions that you've made before, you're excluding data, you've only got people similar to you in the room, and you're not prepared to brook a challenge. Then I'd go, ooh, that isn't your intuition talking, that's something else. So understanding what all these things are, and for me, the when you go, I really haven't a clue, incubate. The answer is incubate. You just sleep on it. go away, think about it, take it for a walk, do some other things, and then come back to it. So that's how I would try and get around all of that. And by the way, for the person that I was talking to yesterday, I thought, okay, at the end, I came to the conclusion that 30% of what she was saying was correct, and I needed to take something out of the conversation rather than just completely dismiss it. Which, had I been not thinking through how I was thinking, I'd have rejected it all. Yeah. So I have taken something away, which I've already started to implement. So,
Christian, slightly similar theme, kind of a sociological question, really. You know, you're a social scientist. Okay? I'm a social scientist. We are supposed to believe in the empirical method, in reproducibility. Okay? How do we square questions like, you know, the experimental method and reproducibility with a study of serendipity, where presumably most of the variables are too complex to be reduced to an experimental method? Or are they?
Well, it's interesting because it's like with any, social construct that in a way, you can never find the perfect measure, but you can come closer to the truth. And, so to give an example, a couple of ways we've been studying it. One is qualitative studies. So over time, you see, for example, in a business incubator, how do entrepreneurs react differently to unexpected events? Who does something with it? Who doesn't? Why? What are the patterns behind it? And so over time, then you see kind of like those things developing. So that's kind of one way to study it. Another one is experiments. So we've been working on experiments where, for example, you put people into different settings and you tell them, here's how you introduce yourself differently, right? So one introduction would be you say, I'm Christian, I'm a professor, and great, right? So that's kind of like unidimensional introduction. Most people introduce themselves. It's the kind of keep it simple, stupid type like introduction we all get kind of trained into. And then there's the kind of hook introduction, which is, hey, I'm Christian, I'm studying serendipity, but what I'm really excited about is my 3-year-old toddler and my newborn and learning about parenting. And now someone might be like, oh my God, such a coincidence. Like, we also just had a newborn, let's talk. And so you can study essentially different cues. You can see different cues into experiments, and you can then actually isolate, oh, there's more serendipity happening here, less here. And so I think that's the fascinating thing, that it's more about, look, the more mature that field becomes, the better our measures become, the better the way becomes that we can actually also then relate them to other constructs. And I think that's what's happening at the moment. That's why I'm so excited about this special issue in particular. I think it's a lot about saying, hey, let's bring out all those different approaches to it that could make sense here, and pair it with the beautiful work that has been done over the last 10 years. I think there's a lot of work at the major conferences now. Academy of Management conference, the major symposia are related to serendipity. So you will see there's a lot of really interesting kind of studies coming out of this. And so Stefan, to your point, I think it's the kind of thing where a lot of people intuitively felt there is something here that's more than what this planning stuff tells us. And now, hey, maybe here's a way of how we can actually bring that out. And one last point I want to make, I found it really interesting, Jess, what you said earlier about the how with experience comes also a certain ability then, maybe to sense make differently, right? So in a way, I see that a lot, right? When working with, board level teams or so, you go on retreats and you will see that their self-awareness, if they're really good leaders, it's just incredible, right? How they would tell you, yeah, of course, there was intuition. In the board meeting, I don't say it's intuition, right? To your point, Jess, I will post-rationalize it. I will say we always planned this, I always did this, but actually, yes, it was intuition, right? And so that's something I think that's very clear. And to me, it's always very similar to these kind of, when you ask people in a trusted setting, who of you has imposter syndrome? I feel the more senior people get, a lot of times you will see, wow, there's a lot of imposter syndrome there, because people on one hand grew very quickly into the positions they are in. So by definition, they can't know everything there. So they had to trust some of their intuition, but also the more self-awareness they have, the more they know there's a lot I have to learn. And so I think the beauty of giving those things a language, being it related to all these kind of what we usually would call biases, but here actually I think it's superpowers. If you can, as a CEO, articulate, yes, I also sometimes don't know exactly the answer, but I give you a North Star, I give you key values, I give you priorities, then actually I'm a much more credible leader than if I pretend that I know everything, I don't have any fears. that's not authentic, and that's also not truthful. And I think that kind of like is what people nowadays want from a leader, that you're saying there is someone who actually portrays reality as it is. And I think with experience, then you become more assured of yourself, that you also feel I can actually, you know, admit to myself and to others that maybe I don't know everything. And I think that I've seen that a lot in our work as well.
Can I turn slightly biographical now? You know, I described you both at the beginning as people at the forefront of, you know, what you might describe as a kind of revolution in how we think about organizations and how we think about leadership and strategy and decision making and so on, precisely by taking non-traditional categories of experience or engagement. How come? I mean, why are you both in this conversation, since you could both have, as it were, gone down more establishment or orthodox routes? Did something happen? And you know, maybe the car incident in your life, Christian, or did you see something that, as it were, your twins in a virtual world didn't see, Jess?
I used to lecture on the senior executive program at London Business School, and I always followed this guy called Zager de Graaf, who I rate Zager's teaching. And if you want to know anything there is to know about decision making, watch one of his lectures or go to one.
About what making? Sorry,
strategic decision making. But he used to say very vehemently there was no place for intuition, and I wasn't in a position to challenge him at the time, but I absolutely disagree, because in my work as an executive coach, what I'm getting a lot of is pushing people to use their intuition and to, what is their gut telling you? I don't know the exact details of their working life. And as a coach, you don't tell people what to do, contrary to what most people think. So you're always pushing people to find their own answers. And that to me seems, the exact opposite of a decision tree, because you can't use those things in real messy life. So, gut feeling is so important, and there was a catalyst to it. I remember I was coaching someone just before I put the proposal in to write the book. I was coaching someone who really wanted to put a hire in to his team, and his senior team really didn't want him to do that hire. And I just said, look, what's your gut telling you? And he said, well, do it and it'll be fine. And I said, is that a done? And he went, yeah. So really what he was asking me for was permission to use his intuition. And I just thought, actually, that's wrong. Everybody should just feel that permission and trust it themselves. Let's write this book and get this thing. I always say intuition needs to come out of its broom closet. So, Christian, there you go. What you're talking about, on a retreat, it's safe, but to the board, it isn't. Strange, huh? So, Stefan, you're on mute.
Apologies. Can I just put a flag on that notion that, as it were, everyone should have their intuition legitimized?
Yeah.
And ask. I'm going to go to Christian and ask him the same question about his biography, but I'm just wondering whether there's something to do with power here as well, because it seems to me that it might be more legitimate for a CEO to exercise intuition than for a receptionist to exercise intuition, and whether the kind of work that you're both doing also opens up some questions about power and other kinds of organizational dynamic. But Christian, I'm going to ask you about how because you could have ended up as a very conventional management scholar, and you haven't. Well, why haven't you?
Mostly because the things I study, the things I work on, are usually deeply personal to me. They're things I feel have to have a deep meaning somehow embedded in them. It comes from this sense of urgency. I mean, you mentioned when I was young, I had a car crash that almost killed me, kind of put me on a sense-making journey towards, what brings me meaning, what gives me meaning. And I love connecting ideas, connecting people. And so with this urgency of, oh, wow, I only have a very limited amount of time on this world, I want to work on something that I deeply care about. And so this is the kind of topic I deeply care about, not only because it's something that throughout my life is a agglomeration of coincidences and serendipity everywhere, So to me, it's a beautiful sense-making device in that way, but also because I've seen what an amazing approach it can be for psychologists, for example, to help people with anxiety, to say, look, the unexpected isn't only a threat, it can also be an ally once you kind of reframe it a little bit, and once you kind of build a muscle for it. And so I feel like it's the kind of thing that can truly help a lot of people, live in a world that's just so full of the unexpected. And someone asked in the chat, here's what are some serendipity moments after the LA fires, which have been so devastating. And I'm based in LA. Our house burned down. The house of my in-laws burned down. Our whole community burned down. And it's the kind of thing where, yeah, it's hard to in the moment kind of say, oh wow, like here will be something. But also it's the kind of thing, it's the only thing that in a way pulls you through to say, here are those small moments of light, right? So here in the hotel that I'm staying in, I bump into old friends I haven't seen, in a long time. And I'm like, oh my God, like, at least those are the small moments of lights that are here. It doesn't negate, and I think that's really important. It doesn't negate the kind of the pain, right? It's very painful to wake up in the morning and to think about, oh my God, can this be real, right? It's painful. It's something that you can't believe is reality. And you give space to that, right? You accept the pain. You say, look, I can't change this anymore. That's what psychologists are for, meditation, right? Like to really help on that side of acceptance. And then the question, what can I still control? And that's really at the core of my work is this kind of Viktor Frankl notion of, at the end of the day, you can't pick that situation always. Like really bad things happen sometimes. And, we all lose people that we love. We all have things in our lives where we just feel lost and it just feels unfair. And then the question is, what can I still control so that my life still feels somehow meaningful? And I think that's kind of why I find that work, especially at the moment, so helpful also to myself to say, can I still carve out some sense making that helps me to make sense out of, hey, I still want to create a beautiful life for my family. I still want to, have a certain impact that kind of goes beyond what we've had so far. And so I think there's still a lot there. But the last point on this, I'm also now, I've had throughout my life those kind of inflection points where something bad happens, right? So an almost bankruptcy with a company, or the car crash, or having COVID, like severe COVID, and now the wildfires, where in each of those moments, it was a new moment of, oh, wow, like a reminder of, hey, life can be over pretty quickly, or something can change very quickly, and nothing is for granted. And at this point, it's to me a topic I've been interested in for a long time, but now it's kind of, okay, now I really want to focus on this more, is the idea of zemblanity, the opposite of serendipity, which is essentially bad luck by design. And, if you look at the wildfires...
Say the word again. I missed the word. The opposite of serendipity is?
Zemblanity. So ZMBLA niddy, zemblanity. And so it's bad luck by design. And so it's the opposite of serendipity, where you have something here in LA, right, where the system was set up in a way that it was just a matter of time that something like this would happen. And so the question then is, how do you build in buffers so that you can break out of these vicious cycles? And so in a way that there's this kind of beautiful paradox again of, hey, you have zemblanity here, but also you can not only then try to break out of the cycle, but also potentially turn that into a serendipity cycle. And so that's kind of what I want to, focus a lot of my effort and time on now, to really think about zemblanity and how it kind of coincides with serendipity, and what we can do about it to, link that to big themes. I think, Stefan, that's why I'm a big fan of Marshall also. I think there's a lot of cool things we can do in that regard in terms of linking it to, these are the issues, right? Climate change, disaster mitigation, like there's big issues here that have those systemic flaws inbuilt. And so the question is, how do we go about, like as individuals, to really then cope with it? And so I think there's a lot in the next years that we can build on.
There's a lot of talk in system world about resilience, and you are one of the most resilient people I think I have ever met. Jess, in the Q&A, and since we're now in that time when I'm not allowed to ask questions, I can only field questions from others. There's a question about whether you think there is a gendered aspect of intuition.
The data doesn't seem to say so. So I think it's kind of old wives' tales that, women's intuition. I think that there is something where it's probably more psychologically safe in women's spaces to talk about it than potentially there is in men's spaces at the moment, but that's a different issue. So we all have intuition and use it. Of course, there is a scale here, so let's talk about that. I mean, it's rather like maths. You know, everybody can add 2 and 2, but some people are maths geniuses. But we can, on the adding 2 and 2 front, you can get better. And there's loads of data showing that intuition, when you start to work it, does improve. So I think that that's an important takeaway.
The questions are flooding in now. One that I was working on yesterday, you were both asked to define the difference between intuition and insight. And I know that you address this explicitly in your book, Jess.
Sorry, my earpiece just keeps falling out.
Did you hear the question?
I did. So I think that you know, an insight often comes as a bang, flash, here it is. And that actually, curiously enough, can also be part of an intuitive process. But an intuition, for most people, comes along as something that's a bit quieter, and it's a bit softer. And if you ignore it, it comes back to you. And so I think that's one of the ways to be able to distinguish what an intuition is. And we often have this internal sense. I talk about intuition as a feeling of knowing. So that there's an emotion that goes along with it, which is generally towards or away from something. And we know that as a kind of internal sense of alignment or misalignment, which the misalignment is, I've got a niggle here, I need to go away, find something else out. That's the intuition. The niggle is the intuition. So it's, for me, there's energy in that too. So there's emotion, energy, thoughts. So it arrives as a package, and often an insight doesn't.
Okay. Christian, do you want to address the same question?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's interesting because insight we use a lot in our work on serendipity when it comes to those kind of eureka moments, right? So eureka, like, you know, you're in the shower and like from one second to the other, you have this amazing insight that kind of, oh my God, I could, you know, renovate my house this way, or whatever the kind of thing is that pops to your mind. And so really this kind of sudden realization of something where your subconscious might have worked on something already, and now it's kind of coming out once you give it a bit of space, right? So that's usually why it's in the shower, or, you know, those kind of things where those sudden insights happen. And then intuition more is this kind of gut level, like judgment, right? Like, does this feel all right here? Is that the kind of situation I want to be in? And I've become, and that's why you know, I'm so delighted to be here, that the more I've been working on serendipity, also more broadly, the more I've been working on management and strategy and everything, the more I've appreciated how much this gut level judgment and learning how to not only trust it, but to actually listen to it in a way that is without the noise, that is without the kind of like what it tries to tell me. Because when I was younger, a lot of my gut feeling was fight or flight, right? It would be the kind of thing where you're like, oh my God, we're almost bankrupt. Like, let me get out of this situation. And so my reflex would be to get out of the situation. And some really bad decisions came from it because I didn't know how to read my gut. I was just kind of like, the gut is telling me to get away. Versus now it's more kind of like giving it more space and saying, let me try to understand this. Let me research what this might mean that it tells me this. Is it something I might have missed? Maybe I didn't really, you know, look at the person holistically enough, and maybe I can figure something out still. And then actually kind of really like this informed gut feeling. And to me, that's kind of like where, in a way, then insight and intuition and analytical come together, where you're saying, let me feel into something and feel if I have a gut feeling about something, but then let me try to sense make it. Let me try to figure out if there's some insight hidden in there that I can actually take with me, that I understand what it really means. And I think getting away from the fight or flight to the informed gut feeling, I think that's kind of one of the biggest steps I've seen in my own life, but also with students.
Interesting. So related to that, I'm going to conflate two questions that have come in. One is about what are our biases? What are our priors that inhibit, as it were, a recognition of serendipitous opportunity? More for Christian, and then more for Jess. What are the techniques that you have observed for nurturing intuition? Because I assume it's kind of latently there, but like most kinds of muscle or capacity, we have to cultivate and develop and listen to these things. So first, on the kind of biases that stop us seeing opportunities, Christian, and then second, Jess, how do we make ourselves more sensitive to intuition?
Yeah, I'd say there's three major biases that I see a lot in the day-to-day, which might be kind of helpful to everyone who's in the room, which is one is really confirmation bias, that, you know, if you're whatever field you're in, whatever you're working on, you have a certain idea of how the world works, and then you try to kind of fit everything into that, right? And so a lot of times, actually, the most interesting, unexpected things are slightly out of our schema, slightly out of what we think is how it works. And so a lot of times we don't see those things because we have a certain idea of no, it should work this way. So hopefully this works this way. So if you're a scientist and you have a kind of surprising experimental result and it doesn't fit your hypothesis, you might just discard it because you're like, oh, this doesn't fit like what I wanted to see, versus saying, no, maybe this is the most interesting thing I could see. And so I think a lot of partisanship comes from this idea of, I believe this person is bad, so now I will see the bad in them. And of course, I then will see a pattern of badness rather than actually maybe the good things. And that's the same with serendipity. If I only see something that I think will be there, I might not see the other things, which really links to the second one, the kind of functional fixedness. Like, do I see only one use for something, right? The hammer nail problem. If I'm used to my hammer and I need a nail in the wall, I will always search for the hammer, even though I could just use any heavy object, right? That I could get the nail into the wall. And so the whole thing being like, am I open to different approaches, uses of things and stuff like that? And there I'm actually a big fan of just kind of like, you know, breaking out of that functional fixedness by asking oneself, what surprised me recently? What are things in my life that maybe I wouldn't have assumed? And so as you do that more and more, you get more open to alternative approaches, alternative ways, and things like that. And then I think post-rationalization, we talked about at the beginning, as, you know, I think post-rationalization can be really dangerous when you're making it fit into whatever narrative you think of yourself, right? So if you're a slightly negative person, you might interpret every incident as, oh, this is the story of my life, right? So something going bad, you might be like, oh my God, yes, like this fits that I'm a person who will always attract bad things. Versus if you're kind of like a positive person, you might have the opposite. And I've always been so fascinated, Stefan. I think we talked about this a couple of years ago, but I always loved this thought experiment where, you know, there's a bank robber coming into a bank, and imagine you're standing in the bank and there's one shot fired, and that shot goes through your arm, right? And so, you know, an unlucky person, someone who identifies as an unlucky person, would say, this is so unfair. This is the story of my life, that I was the only person shot in this room. A lucky person, someone who self-identifies as lucky, would be like, oh my God, thank you that I wasn't killed. Like, it could have gotten through my heart. And so this kind of how you interpret situations, how you frame situations, and really breaking out of framing situations only from the perspective of what can go wrong to the perspective of, is there some sort of meaning still here that I can break out of? I think that is where resilience comes from, to say, can I somehow still reframe that situation? Can I somehow then have some sort of agency in that? And I think so there might be those biases, but also there's ways, I think, to break out of those biases.
I'm going to say nothing about having one's ear shot. I'm going to go straight to Jess and ask her about techniques or practices or ways in which you can help the people on this call cultivate their intuition.
I just want to pick up on what Christian was saying. You know, having been through a rough illness myself, they always used to say, all of the doctors around me said, this is a teachable moment. Yes, you're going through a teachable moment. And I would be going, yes, but is it learnable? Can I learn something from this? Can I take something away? I don't want you just to teach me. I need to be able to apply this thing. So what you're really asking, you know, what techniques are there? I mean, shameless plug. My book is rammed full of different techniques that you can use, but I think a couple of them are, you know, talk to this thing as a friend. Talk to your intuition and say, hey, hi, how are you doing today? Now, what are you thinking about this thing? Because we don't conceive of it. We just go, oh, intuition is something woolly inside me. But the minute that you start treating it as an ally, it will start to show up for you as an ally. And so that would be my first piece of advice. And the second thing is just to notice. We are remarkably bad at noticing what's going on for ourselves. So tune in. You know, what is happening in your stomach? I did some amazing work with an Indian guy who said to me, I want you to tell me what your intuition is telling you from your shoulder blades. I went, that's new. So it's just to start noticing, and that's all he was trying to make me do, was notice. So between people, I love sometimes in a meeting, there's a bad mood that's emerged from somewhere, where. So you can project a little mini cloud around and go, okay, who does the cloud belong to? And do some fun stuff like that to take you out of this thing. And another easy technique is the coin toss one. But when I interviewed a polar explorer in my book, and I really liked his take on it. It's not that the coin is going to tell you heads, tails, and that's what you do. He said that when he was in really difficult polar conditions and trying to decide, do I go across this crevasse or that one? So it's a matter of life and death for him. That he flips a mental coin, and what he's paying attention to is to which side does he want the coin to land on when it's in the air. And that for him is the intuition. So if you're looking for something like quick and dirty, I thought that is a beautiful way of just checking in. And I noticed there was one question for someone talking about leadership. So just to flip the conversation slightly to what you do as a leader. Hal Reisiger was a CEO I spoke to, and he said that he, as CEO, had something which he calls a gimme. And that is that anybody could go and ask him for something if they intuitively believed that it was strong enough. And Hal might disagree with it, but the gimme was that it's okay for Hal to disagree, but you believe strongly enough in your intuition, you go away and do it. And if it didn't work, that you then explain everything to the team, so that it wasn't a question of failure. It's a question of how do we amplify learning for everybody. So I thought that was a really lovely thing to do. And I think the other thing is to talk about your own intuitions as a leader, because if you make it safe for other people, they will start to come to you and talk about it. So those would be my two mini techniques.
Very helpful, very helpful. We've got 10 minutes to go, and we've got more questions than we have time to answer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run about 4 questions. I'm going to bundle them up, and you can either choose or you can give very rapid fire answers to each of them. And with apologies to those questions that I won't be able to get round to. So I've picked out 4. The first is what we're talking about a developed economy question? In other words, is there a kind of relativity that has to do with likely outcomes in our worlds? So that's question 1. Question 2. Intuition is something that has for a long time driven philanthropic behavior. And many of us spend quite a lot of time trying to encourage philanthropists to be less intuitive and more, as it were, problem focused. Do you have any thoughts on that? The third, no conversation would be possible these days without questions about AI. And the specific question is, can you imagine, as it were, a model that simulates sensitivity to intuition and synchronicity? And the last, how spirituality adjacent is the work that you both do? And if adjacent, how? So those are the questions. They're pretty different. We have about 7 or 8 minutes. So Christian, I'm going to cold call. No, I'm not. Jess is unmuted. I'm going to go first to Jess.
Christian is now too, so feel free. But which one do you want me to do?
Well, I quite like the spirituality question, actually. And I wonder whether there are lessons that we can learn from practices. Somebody mentioned Zen Buddhism earlier on. Somebody, I think, Jess, you talked about shoulder blades, which reminds me of kind of, centering and meditation and yoga and so on. And I wonder whether how much of this is adjacent or not.
Okay, for me, you don't need to be spiritual to be intuitive. It's not a given. For me, it should be, it's like opening your laptop. You open your laptop and you start to use it. Same for intuition. You go, hello, what's happening right now? And start to use it. I don't think that spiritual practices are important, but nevertheless, if you feel as an individual that they're supportive to you, fine, absolutely go for it. I would say that really, if your calendar is jammed and you have meetings from 8 in the morning till 6 at night, and then you get your work done, you don't have any time to notice. And the important thing for intuition is just is this paying attention. So for me, it's less about spirituality, but possibly about being mindful to your own cues and reactions and what is actually happening in a space, and taking the time to shift away from being desperately busy.
Interesting. Christian.
Well, it's interesting because, I grew up kind of, believing in philosophy and, and I had a neighbor who was very religious. And so I had kind of like those two models of how you can somehow connect to something in some way or the other. And then, now in LA, I have a lot of kind of people who are more spiritual in a broader sense. And so it's kind of, I've always found it fascinating, like spirituality as a kind of way of finding some sort of meaning, some sort of grounding, some sort of connection, right? And I think there's so many links, because you're in a way trying to figure out, to Jess's point, like, how do you find the presence of the moment, and how do you just ground yourself there? And some people might find it in prayer, some people might find it in meditation, whatever it is, but it's really this idea of, can I find myself present in where I am at this particular point? And I think that kind of, in a way, if you think about how the brain works, if you have that point then where the brain can calm down a little bit and kind of have that moment of groundedness, there's obviously a lot in there that you can kind of potentially, both in the moment, ground yourself, but also more broadly have more presence in moments, which makes it more likely that you can see cues. One thing I briefly, just as a link to the second one, because I'm such a big fan of that question, I want to make sure we get it in, is really the developing country question, in terms of, is this the kind of thing, because Stefan, I know you and Marshall Institute obviously work a lot, right, on social innovation, social entrepreneurship, and so the question really being, what is the role of those kind of themes in really kind of, developing countries, but also more broadly in really, when you think about like impact and what we can do about it. And there's two things there. I think one is, I've learned the most about serendipity from developing country work. A lot of my work is in Kenya and South Africa. I've worked there for over a decade, and R Labs, for example, one of my favorite organizations, called Reconstructed Living Labs. They are, people in the Cape Flats in Cape Town who developed this amazing kind of education program, right? Hey, here's 10 steps to use social media to build your business, things like that. And then they scaled that to hundreds of thousands of people. And they have serendipity on a daily basis out of necessity, because it's in a way, you need to be like, the unexpected happens all the time. So you only can survive if you, out of necessity, develop that kind of serendipity over time. And so, give you an example, when COVID happened, they had physical in-training programs. COVID happens, right? Boom, big unexpected event. First thing they do is, let's do a WhatsApp type solution where we do micro courses, nano courses, where now you get taught on those kind of micro messages. And so completely new, cool approach to how you can educate people about a particular topic became one of the innovations that they still use now post-COVID. And so it's those kind of like things where, out of necessity, they're doing that all the time. And I've learned a lot from them, how they essentially create that environment, right? How do you create the environment that people feel empowered to actually act on the unexpected? Simple things they do, right? Everything from, when you go into their main office, there's a fresh coffee truck, or at least there used to be a fresh coffee truck where you get fresh coffee in a very impoverished area. Why? Because you come in here, we respect you as a human, leave your gun outside, you're coming in here, you get fresh coffee, even if that's where part of our resources go. And I think it's this kind of thing where, if you give people that kind of feeling of, wow, I am someone here, I can do something here, there's a lot of those kind of small practices they're embedding that make it more likely that it happens. And so, long story short, I think a huge role of this, we do a lot of research actually in emerging markets, especially around serendipity, how it is one of the key approaches to actually not only innovation, but also empowerment. And then second, more broadly, when it comes to impact, if you think about how intricate, how complex societal and environmental topics are, by definition, you cannot solve them just by having a plan for the next 10 years. You will see that a lot of partnerships, a lot of ideas, a lot of solutions will emerge unexpectedly, and you got to be ready for it. And I think that's kind of then the power of, good grant making, for example, to say, don't focus too much on the particular solution, focus on the problem area and allow them to potentially pivot from that particular solution to another one, because actually impact is not just a straight line, Stefan, to your point, but it's a squiggle. And so I think that kind of thinking is actually crucial in that kind of thing, as long as it can be somehow put into a non-arbitrary kind of model of impact.
Okay, right. I'm going to ask each of you for your final thoughts. But before that, I want a yes/no answer from each of you. Can you imagine a world in your lifetime in which an AI can simulate intuition? Yes or no? No from Jess. Christian?
Can I caveat mine? Sorry, I'm going to caveat mine.
Go on then.
It could simulate it, but could it really be it? No. Because intuition is bound out of someone's experience and their context and who they are and their personality and the immediate what's immediately going on with the people in front of them. So no.
So no. Christian?
Well, I asked ChatGPT recently to tell me about myself and then how I would make that decision. And I have to say, it knows partly more about myself than I know about myself. So putting it differently, I think if I learned one thing from reading The Economist, for example, you know how The Economist magazine has these predictions for the year, and it says, yeah, these things happen. And most of these predictions tend to be always wrong, right? In The Economist, but also more broadly. So one thing I've learned is to not make predictions where I have no idea where exponentially we might be in a couple of years. So the only thing I can predict is if you can build a muscle for the unexpected, you're ready for whatever you're doing. But I don't know. It might be, might not be, right? We'll see. Yeah. Nobody knows. Yeah.
Well, if you're going to make predictions, they should be probabilistic. Right. Final words from Christian and then final words from Jess. We've got 2 minutes. Final thoughts, Christian.
To me, it comes to, I think that the beauty of intuition, serendipity is, in a way, giving power to something that maybe we shied away from because you can't easily systematize it in ways that you can systematize other things. But actually that gives away much more power than we think. And so it's almost like this kind of, we have this illusion of control. Oh yeah, like as long as we believe we can only plan and it'll be fine, we have more control. Not at all. I think the thing is, it's really shifting away from this idea of uncertainty that you can, decrease it to complexity and understanding that you can't always reduce ambiguity in the system. But what you can do is you can be better prepared for it. You can be adaptive, you can be resilient about it. And I think that's kind of where I really recommend the kind of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, because, this gentleman, he survived the Holocaust. He, was in the toughest of situation you can imagine. And he kind of created a meaning-making device, essentially, where he said, look, if I am in a concentration camp where there's no meaning whatsoever, still I can talk with people tomorrow to make them feel better, right? All my prison inmates. Now I have a reason to wake up tomorrow morning. And so what he did is he created a meaning that wasn't there a priori. And I think in the world we live in, that's kind of where resilience, I think, comes from, to say sometimes objectively that just isn't meaning because the world is just going to a very bad place a lot of times. But at the same time, can I subjectively still find a meaning to then kind of push forward and have the impact that we all hopefully want to have?
Got it. Jess?
If you aren't using your intuition, your peers and your competitors will be. So they have a competitive advantage. Is that the way you really want to leave it? So get in touch with yours.
Very good, very good. An amazing conversation. There were more questions than I had a chance to put to you. I look forward to the second editions or the next books. I thank you for, as it were, putting to bed this old distinction between the analytic and the intuitive, and for sensitizing us to both serendipity and intuition as mechanisms for humanity, but also for advantage. Thank you all for giving up an hour of your lives to spend at the LSE. I'm enough of a former publisher to say, if you don't yet own these two books, please buy them immediately. If you buy them, then please read them. Thank you for being here. Thank you to my colleagues, particularly Kate and Julia, for organising time. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.